So, Rosemary, we're here in Modbury. Tremendously exciting weekend because, of course, we've got all sorts of different things going on across many different dig sites. One of the things, of course, we would love to do is find the manor house that was associated with the Champernowne family. Now, we understand this definitely existed as a property. There's lots of evidence for it, but we simply don't know quite where it was. And I know you have done a lot of research into the Champernownes over many years, haven't you?
Absolutely. I mean, it would be absolutely wonderful to pin down exactly where that building was, because my interest in the Champernownes really grew from one woman. She was Catherine Champernowne, and she she was the mother of Sir Walter Raleigh, and I've studied her life and written about her to find out exactly where that building that she lived in and was born in would be wonderful.
Excellent. So it really would be a tremendous thing if we could make any progress on that, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Because, of course, I've been doing a little bit of research looking into, guess what we'll call the Modbury Champernownes, because they are, I mean, it's a vast number of branches of this family that we could talk about. Here I have a very basic family tree of some of the introductory research that's been carried out into the Champernownes that were here in Modbury, including some of the ones that were here around the time of the Civil War. So, here we have Philip Champernowne and his wife Margaret. Philip was the son of Henry Champernowne. And of course, once we go back into the earlier generations of this tree, we come to some more prominent characters that definitely have an awful lot of connections, including one Sir Richard Champernowne. And one of the reasons that we've been able to trace these family groups is because the Champernownes are so wealthy and influential and well connected. They have a lot of property, they have a lot of interests in property, and they have a lot of land. And in this particular period of time, wherever you have property and land inheritance, you usually have some records at least that will survive that can help us to trace those lineages and work out what those family relationships are. But of course, one of the relationships that's a little more difficult to ascertain is Sir Arthur Champernowne, who is the father of Henry. And we've got lots of evidence for Henry and his family here in Modbury. But I understand that Sir Arthur and Sir Richard Champernowne have connections to other Champernownes that live elsewhere. And it's quite complex piece of research to make those connections, isn't it?
It is indeed. I mean, Sir Arthur and his elder brother, Sir Richard, who incidentally he died in 1622 and he didn't leave us a will, so that's more difficult to trace. But they were the sons of a chap called Henry Champernowne of Modbury. He's a fascinating character. He fought on the Huguenot side in the French Wars of Religion, and we have lots of evidence for what he was doing over there through correspondence. He sent lots of dispatches back to Walsingham and to William Cecil. And he even died out there in 1570. Yes. So we know a lot about Henry, and through him we can go back to his father, who was John Champernowne. And he also was a sort of quite a charismatic character, I think you can say. He was described as a bit of a joker by Richard Carew, who mentioned him when he wrote about the family in his History of Cornwall. And he served Henry VIII. Okay. He was in Henry's household, and he became a gentleman pensioner.
Yes.
So he was one of the elite bodyguard that accompanied the king when he went out, and was actually there when Anne of Cleves arrived in Greenwich. Which
is incredible, really, isn't it? And I think when you mention as well that word elite, that strikes me as something that's an excellent way to characterise the Champernownes, because I understand that it effectively, the sort of power marriages they made, if you will, run rather like a roll call of many of the most prominent families in England at the time, don't they?
They most certainly do, and they were so well connected, and they were at the heart of things. Although a lot of them lived in Devon, they were really, really at the heart of what was going on. They served at court. And that theme of well-connected families, it goes right the way back through the whole history of the Champernownes.
Yes.
The men of the family were very good at making a good marriage, which brought them more wealth and status, and they've grown through that. But going back to John, he married Catherine Blount. So that's another of those very high-profile families. They had their son Henry, but he's only a child when John decides to go off to Europe with his cousin, who's Sir Peter Carew, who's a very colourful character. And not quite clear what they were doing. They pretended they were merchants. But
that covers a whole range of options, doesn't it?
They might have been spying, who knows. But we know that on the way back, John and Peter Carew and another companion of theirs in Vienna contracted a rather awful disease, and John died out there, leaving his young son Henry. At that time, John's father, Sir Philip Champernownes, is still alive, and he looks after and takes charge of Henry, the infant, for a while, but he dies in 1545. We've got lots of information on Sir Philip from his will and from his Inquisition post-mortem, and also records of his dealings at court. He's mentioned quite a lot.
He is, and it's quite interesting that you should mention him, actually, because when we've been doing some wider research into some of the records of the priory in Modbury, in 1544 there is in fact some documents that we have that are held by Eton College, and in 1544 Eton College grant rights over an area known as the Prior's Gardens. They grant
those
rights to Sir Philip.
So
he has that connection with the priory land as well.
Sir Philip indeed, and he also, along with his son John and John's widow, also came into quite a lot of other ecclesiastical lands after the dissolution of the monasteries. So they are sort of still building their land holdings. They are growing. But when Philip dies, it's John's brother Arthur, his younger brother, who was born in 1524. He takes over the care of Henry, and Arthur, he's quite a colourful character as well in his own right. He was a soldier, he fought in France, he was also very much involved in the Western rebellion, sometimes known as the Prayer Book Rebellion.
Yes.
And he actually was knighted there, and one of the things he got as a reward was he was given the clapper bells out of a lot of the Devon churches, because they took them out to stop them ringing them again to draw people together in rebellion. So Arthur, he marries his cousin's widow, and his cousin was Sir George Carew, who went down with the Mary Rose.
Yes.
So you've got those connections coming
Very
through.
high profile, and it's interesting to see as well that because of this extra line coming down from Arthur, we've got our Modbury lot who are descendants of John, and you do see a lot of cross-referencing. And I think one of the really interesting things for us to talk about really is that when you're researching a family such as the Champernownes, we see a lot of repeated names. This is very common. And of course, as a family historian, one of the big challenges that you face is saying, I seem to see a bunch of the same names repeated generation upon generation. How do I distinguish namesakes from one another, particularly when they're all within the same family, but possibly cousin branches? So what have you found useful in trying to make that distinction where you can?
You've got to be very, very careful, and they have got this absolutely infuriating habit. The pool of names is quite restricted anyway, but the number of Arthurs, Philips, Henrys and Catherines, which has been my particular problem in researching the life of one particular Catherine. I think it's really a forensic approach. You've really got to interrogate every document that you come across, and you've got to cross-reference it with where that person could possibly have been at that time from other evidence. And it's only when you put that together that you can start to feel confident that you've got the right Catherine or the right Arthur. But it is very difficult, and it's so easy to make
as you
mistakes.
say, particularly when you've got what I would call ancestral spaghetti. You've got a sort of plate of ancestral spaghetti you're trying to untangle. And I think taking each document, as you say, not just taking it at face value, but properly contextualising it and saying, actually, what do I know about the provenance of this document? What can I be certain that it's telling me? And what are the moot points where we can say it may indicate certain things, but we need to see how that sits in the wider landscape of the evidence before we can say that we have a better idea of what's going on.
Fit it right into the context of all the other evidence you've got that you've been able to pin down. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
it gets swamped and lost.